Whole sword, nah, take them hand-me-downs or nothing in your bank accounts, cause even those who know it's there can fully cut the cancer out. Queen said let them eat cake, but they need bread. The sheep dead and shepherds don't bake. Most fled with the shakes like they methadones late. At that extra slow pace, prayed they'd enter gold gates, while the rest stood their ground at the castle and they took it down. Guillotine shadow on a basket that was full of crowns. Took a crowd of thousands to find power in his people. Takes one to hypnotize them from a tower or a steeple. Laws protect freedom, but freedom is no laws. Lest this gold that the beast cannot reach with his own paws. And it's easy to hold yours, believe you're your own lord. Meet defeat before you'd ever retreat from a cold sword. Nah, take them hand-me-downs or nothing in your bank accounts, cause even those who know it's there can fully cut the cancer out. That tumor grows, strip the earth till it's done. Remember it's who you know while you search for your crumbs. Millions are starving, can't find a job and watch others make thousands a day. Who's really robbing? The truth is scary, it'll turn you revolutionary. Here to topple towers, walk with us if your boots are heavy. These boots are waterlogged. From my off and on, I walk a guard. The course is hard, sinking trying to cross the pond, thinking they can launch the bomb. Looking at my stepdaughter, teach her how to shoot and pull a hook out of some fresh water. Only put your best forward, lever sharp and discipline. Sense them when they listening, whether or not they slithering. The flags on the shoreline, a long line of pin them and they withering. The geniuses, the small minds are riddling. The calls down the fixes and they shifted out the transmission. Twisted up your fans' vision, strings around their ambition. Young man with grams hidden, proudly plans prison. Working third shift and what it is to be a man sinks. And this is all a cycle, we gon' break it at the last second. Giving last penance, being taken from the crashed wreckage. Gus smart, waiting, hearts aching from the past lessons. Always ask questions so they show me that they have weapons. Fear is how the frequency set, and no remote's lost where everything leads into death. Fuck what your clothes cost, closed off, free from the net. Remain my own boss in due time, leap to my death. Holding my own cross, don't acknowledge our crimes that are conscious in line. Suffer subconscious design and stay in constant rewind. Won't make sense until the dollars decline. Step out the line, then we'll reshape the box they made with parts of our mind. Millions are starving, been working hard and still they're eating off of our plate. Who's really robbing? The truth is scary, it'll turn you revolutionary. Here to topple towers, walk with us if your boots are heavy. Step out the line, only you can change you, only we can change us. False idol.
Yeah, what up? Welcome to another episode of Herm Radio. We at episode 30, man. We're deep into it, right? Season 1 of Herm Radio. What you just heard was A God off of the False Idol tape, man, with Let 'Em Eat Cake. That was a really dope track by A God, so definitely check out A God, man. Tonight is a very interesting show. We're gonna kind of take a different take than we usually do with the music and the interviews and all that type of stuff. I mean, it is an interview, don't get me wrong, but we actually got Benji Laszlo Fields here tonight, who's aspiring astronomer and UFO researcher. Very interesting dude I met in my personal life, man. Dude got a lot of knowledge, information. Dude is really passionate about kind of the different aspects of astronomy, extraterrestrial research and data and all that kind of stuff. How's it going, Benji? How's everything? Your mic is muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I got you. Yep.
Yeah, good to be on.
Thank you for being here, man. And we also got co-hosting and just here to just be part of the conversation, add his wisdom, add his questions and stuff like that. We got Pete, man. Pete's Geek, a man of many names and many talents, man. But he's just here to kind of be part of the conversation and back me up and all that type of stuff. What up, Pete?
What up? Yeah, this would be cool. Let's just get into it.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw on some beats, man, just for some kind of background vibes. And yeah, man, so Benji, tell us about your background. When did you start getting into like what's happening in the stars and what's happening in space and stuff like that, man?
It probably began when I was around 6 years old. I was I would say I was always someone who got really fixated on things, and what happened though, like, I saw Star Wars when I was 6, and I got really into science fiction, things like that from there. And the way I would put it is that there are certain things that just capture your imagination and they don't let go. And for me, it was this. It was space, extraterrestrial life, and you know, to this day, you know, now I'm 21, I'm still into it. So it just kind of lasted, you know. And you'll find with a lot of people in the field of astronomy, they have a similar story. It begins at a very early age.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So most people that's into this field start off as children.
I don't want to generalize, but
Okay.
I would say it's true for a lot of people I've met. You know, just kind of going off of my anecdotal experience. I mean, again, I think that it's just that it's one of those things that really captures your imagination at an age when your imagination can be captured by things, I guess.
What was
You know?
the first memory that you can remember that was like, wow, that's something interesting. Like that, this is something that interests me.
I mean, it's kind of tricky because it's hard to pinpoint it on one memory. You know, like it was sort of more of just a train of events and just things I was exposed to, you know. But I mean, you know, my story is fairly typical in that I got into it I didn't get into science through science, I got into science through science fiction, you know, sci-fi stuff, like, you know, movies and things of that nature. And then I got more and more into actually looking into the reality of it, I guess.
So, let me ask you this. So let's get right into some of this kind of current event stuff that's going on right now. We're seeing in the news and personal recording stuff like that. Pictures of like UFOs, supposed UFOs, stuff that's being seen on like mass levels, lights in the sky. There's actual satellites going up in the sky that we do know about. You know what I mean? Some people that's throwing people off. Like there's various stuff going on. Some people think it's like military equipment and it's not actually anything foreign. What's going on, man? What's your interpretation of like these kind of like UFO sightings and stuff going on? Is it for real? Is it fake?
I mean, it's really a case-by-case basis. You know, I mean, I would say about 95%, and this is coming from personal experience because I investigate sightings, and about 95% of reports are simply, you know, cases of mistaken identity, right? You know, it is a satellite, or it is, you know, a weather balloon, or, you know, a sky lantern, what have you, you know. But I would say, with what's going on in the news now, what I think is the most compelling is the stuff that is actually getting released by government agencies, by the Navy and the Pentagon, because for the first time since 1969, when Project Blue Book closed. Project Blue Book was the government's official investigation into UFOs.
Yeah.
And since 1969, when Project Blue Book, which was the official public investigation into UFOs, closed down, the government has never publicly acknowledged that they've investigated UFOs. They've claimed since 1969 to have absolutely zero interest in the subject. Suddenly, 2017, the story drops in the New York Times saying that there was a UFO program called ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was it was the Pentagon's official investigation into UFOs. And the amazing thing about that is that, you know, for a long time people said, oh, well, you know, the government can't keep secrets about this stuff. But then when that 2017 article dropped, nobody had any idea that it was happening, you know. And it's really, you know, it's compartmentalization, right? It's I mean, the way it works is that even most of the people in the Pentagon didn't know about it, because you only know if you have the need to know. But this program, there's reason to think that besides the videos, they might also have material from alleged UFOs. Because there's one line in the New York Times article from 2017, which I'll pull up right now, actually.
Okay. I don't know if you can you share it on the camera?
I'm not sure how to. One sec.
I can pull it up if you tell me.
Yeah. Look up. So the New York Times article is called.
But what is the article? You gotta read it.
Well, I don't have to read it. I can just summarize what it says.
Yeah.
But basically, yeah. There was but there was a line in the article that's really interesting where it says that the program itself was farmed out to a private contractor, Bigelow Aerospace, which besides UFOs, what they really do is they make inflatable modules for the International Space Station. But Robert Bigelow, who's the CEO of the company, is also really deeply obsessed with UFOs. He bought this ranch in Utah called Skinwalker Ranch, which was kind of this hub of all kinds of weird...
You gotta tell us more about that later.
Yeah. It was kind of this hub of weird phenomena, paranormal, UFOs, the whole laundry list of strange things, basically. And he bought it, and he paid scientists to live there to investigate these occurrences. And we have reason to think that was part of the Pentagon program, because the Pentagon used Robert Bigelow as their contractor. He was the one who basically took their program. And so in the New York Times article, it mentions how Bigelow Aerospace has warehouses in Nevada where they are where they have material that was allegedly recovered from UFOs. I actually have the quote right here. I pulled up the quote.
Okay.
Under Mr. Bigelow's direction, the company modified buildings in Las Vegas for the storage of metal alloys and other material that Mr. Luis Elizondo, was the guy who broke the story to the media and everything, and program contractors said had been recovered from unidentified aerial phenomena. Researchers also studied people who said they had experienced physical effects from encounters with the objects and examined them from the physiological changes. So apparently they weren't just looking at alleged fragments left behind by these UFOs, or at least, again, alleged, right? They were also looking at physical effects that these things had on people's bodies after close encounters. And there is a documented history of that in the UFO literature. There are a number of cases where people have, gotten close to UFOs and then had, radiation effects and so forth. And apparently that was another thing that the program was looking at. So I guess the point is that a lot of people are just looking at the videos, but that program was doing a lot more than just looking at videos or interviewing pilots. There was definitely a lot more going on.
Yeah. The Skinwalker Ranch program we're still talking about.
Yeah. Well, the Skinwalker Ranch program, I'm saying, is very much tied to the Pentagon program and the Pentagon program is where all of these videos come from that are now, going viral all over the place.
Let's pause there for a second. Let's pause there. So, Pete, have you heard of Skinwalker Ranch?
No, not really.
You haven't heard of it?
No.
Let's talk more about skin. So for everybody that doesn't know, a lot of people don't know about like what Skinwalker Ranch is. So we're just like saying that, and people are like, okay, Skinwalker Ranch. But this is actually a real interesting thing. Benji, could you like break down like what it is, like what they say
Yeah.
it is?
So Skinwalker Ranch is this. It's a ranch out in Utah, which is sort of, again, it's kind of a hub of just weird phenomenon, UFOs, paranormal, what have you. Basically, anything that, almost any phenomenon that's outside of the purview of modern science, or of mainstream science rather, there have been claims that these things go on at the ranch. And it goes back to the Native Americans who lived there. They had a lot of legends of things, and of course the Skinwalker, I believe, it's a Native American folktale. I don't really remember the details, except that I think it has something to do with shape-shifting.
Shape-shifting.
But
they just kind of
Yeah, this is more what I'm interested in.
What'd you say, Pete?
Well, yeah, I'm just interested in many ways. I guess you could say the more indigenous Native American side of things, where it's like you actually have kind of like an expansion of your bandwidth, and you through like perception and different exercises, and through like advanced like microscopes and different things, you can really I believe see the universe in a greater level of detail, and you're able to, and it kind of illuminates worlds that you didn't even know existed. But like sometimes what I wonder is, I believe that there are a number of beings that exist basically in hyperspace, which is relative to us would kind of seem like it was like above us, but really like these like lighter beings are just of like a slightly different bandwidth. So like it's even a subtle thing, I think, but it's such a fine-tuned little bandwidth that like human beings don't perceive it with their like untrained eye,
Well,
I wonder about,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wonder about like when you say even the word alien, it's almost like it means foreign, but I feel like these beings are here, but they're in a slightly different plane, They're like in a slightly different like orientation within the universe,
Yeah, definitely, and that is definitely a distinct possibility that maybe the important thing is that I do not claim to know what UFOs are, where they come from, or who's. At this point, we can only speculate, but I think that we have to be open to the possibility that rather than these things being interplanetary, like you said, they could be just as native to Earth as we are, but in a different dimension. But it's also important to kind of define what a dimension really is, because there's kind of a lot of confusion around it. I mean, what the scientific definition or mathematical definition of a dimension is, it's how many values you need to plot a point. So for example, right, like one dimension would be a line, and it would be any point on that line. 2 dimensions, it'd be 2 axes, any point along those axes. 3 dimensions, not just X and Y, but Z, up and down as well. And 4 dimensions, the prevailing idea is that the 4th dimension is time. So not just where something is in 3-dimensional space, but where it is in time. But sort of a good analogy to understand higher dimensions is, there's this story that was written back in like the early 1900s called Flatland, and it was basically about these beings that were 2-dimensional shapes. They were living triangles and circles and squares, and they were completely confined to a 2-dimensional surface. They were living on basically like a sheet of paper almost. And so to a Flatlander, let's say, their entire reality that they know is on that two-dimensional plane. But let's say I were to step on the flatland as a three-dimensional being stepping on their two-dimensional
surface
plane. If I were to do that, they would not be able to see most of me, except for the part of my foot that is directly contacting their little flatland. And what they would see would not be a three-dimensional foot, they would see a two-dimensional cross-section of the three-dimensional shape. So
Right.
what scientists think is that there's no like conclusive evidence of higher dimensions. It's at this point completely theoretical, but the idea behind it is that much like how the third dimension is kind of this giant bulk that surrounds the second dimension. See, like this paper is just kind of floating in it's a 2D space floating in 3D space. Our four-dimensional space-time that we know is a subset of a fifth-dimensional bulk that surrounds it. And so is it possible that there could be beings in the fifth-dimensional bulk sort of kind of hanging around? And yeah, totally is.
That's what I think kind of it basically is, yeah. Because I think the human beings are of a denser kind of like consistency or material basis, and relative, like you're talking about how it's different relative to each person or each point of view. Relative to us. Oh, I mean, yeah, actually, another thing that resonated, though, you said, is kind of like what I've heard before, too, is it's like, say you looked at an elephant, like, with the universe, like, you're only really seeing a cross-section or the trunk of the elephant, but the rest of it is there, and it's just, but, I'm pretty sure that there is, like, I mean, honestly, this comes from, like, some subjective first-hand perceptual experiences that I've had, but like I really think there is kind of a more subtle, lighter kind of like layer of reality or physical reality that kind of pervades everything, but also like kind of hovers above our like plane, you know?
So let me let me say something right quick. Excuse me, gentlemen, but like rewind. I want to rewind right quick into something like when Pete was breaking something down. You talked about vision. You said two things. You talked about vision and you talked about bandwidth. And me coming from an audio standpoint, I'm an audio guy, audio engineer. I learned that the human brain or the human mind, whatever, the human brain can only hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. We can only hear from that range, from the to the ooh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Once you get a certain low
of bandwidth, you know, that there is like, it's not necessarily ultimately limited, but it's something to be aware of, the filters, so to speak, that human beings actually, or the screens that human beings perceive the physical reality through, you know?
So check this out. Speaking on what both of you guys are saying, like, so if we can only hear that extent. Dogs can hear past that. Animals can hear way past that. So it exists. There's things that exist that we can hear. Vision is similar. We can only see certain colors. Right now, I can only see certain colors on the screen. If in the whole world, I can only see certain colors. So that's like what Pete was saying, is how it's like the bandwidth. Like, what if there's light? He used the word light, and that's a great word to use because that's a higher frequency. What if there is that thing that we can't see? And then Benji, you talking about the dimensions and how we can only see that surface. And this brings me to like kind of a slightly next kind of topic, or a slightly different question that I had was like, what about the death realm? What about the realm of those like anything that's dead or in the non-life realm? What if that's like, what if they like, when we talk about dealing or connecting with like any type of creature or ghost or like ancestor or any of that type of stuff, what if there's actually things on higher dimensions and that's how we see them like just popping in and out in some weird way that we can comprehend because they're on a higher frequency? What if that's a
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, like at this point at least, and I'm coming at this from a scientific angle. So I'm not necessarily. I'm coming at it as sort of an empirical way, not so much a subjective experience way. And obviously there's different ways to interpret reality, but I mean, from my point of view, there isn't really at this point any evidence of afterlife or any evidence of ghosts and things like that. I think at this point, because we don't know what makes our brain conscious, we can't completely rule anything out. But I'm not sure if I'm ready to make that logical leap.
Well, see, that's interesting, because that's the thing. Like, I've become convinced that the universe itself is conscious, and that this consciousness is capable of forming potentially anywhere. It wouldn't only be like privy to the human brain, you know.
Yeah.
But there are certain subtle aspects of our consciousness that are unique to us, for sure, right now. Idiosyncratic.
That's there's a name for that, panpsychism it's called.
Yeah,
the
I
idea
know.
that you basically, if you have things in the right arrangement of information and pattern,
Right.
it will become self-aware. And
Why
it
not- why
doesn't
wouldn't
have
it?
to just be neurons, it can be other things. I mean, I would say,
And then once consciousness starts, it builds on itself. It seeks more representations of itself, and basically, like, regardless, it basically just tries to propagate itself. And I feel like once you have the right conditions, of course, there's going to be more and more sentient life that exists and pervades the entire universe, really, in different forms.
Yeah, well, for example, I mean, one of my favorite examples of what you're talking about is there was a team in Romania team of scientists who looked into the possibility of plasma-based life. And what they did was they basically took these spheres of plasma, and what they found was that a lot of the definitions that we use for life, like the fact, for example, that it's self-contained. These things were these little spheres that were self-contained. Another thing was that they were able to, in a way, communicate information with each other, because basically they would. So here, yeah, I just pulled up an article about it. So
okay?
So each sphere had a boundary made up of two layers: an outer layer of negatively charged electrons and an inner layer of positively charged ions. Trapped inside the boundary was an inner nucleus of gas atoms. The amount of energy in the initial spark governed their size and lifespan. So a distinct boundary layer that confines and separates an object from its environment is one of the four main criteria generally used to define living cells. So they decided to find out if the cells met other criteria: the ability to replicate, the ability to communicate information, and to metabolize and grow. They found that by taking the spheres could replicate by splitting in two. Under the right conditions, they also got bigger, taking up neutral argon atoms and splitting them into ions and electrons to replenish their boundary layers. Finally, they could communicate information by emitting electromagnetic energy, making the atoms within other spheres vibrate at a particular frequency. The
Right.
spheres are not the only self-organizing systems to meet all of these requirements, but they are the first gaseous cells. This research raises the intriguing possibility that life throughout the universe could have a very much broader basis than normally recognized. If plasma-based life can arise naturally, places to look for it could include the outer layers or interiors of stars, planetary magnetospheres, and even ball lightning. So, I mean, the one thing about the experiment that did not fulfill the definition of life as we know it is there wasn't any Darwinian evolution, in the sense that these things didn't have DNA that they were able to pass on to the next generation. Life as we know it,
Yeah.
there's
That's the
information being
information.
passed from parent to the next. These things were not able to do that, but in those
So it
other
just
four
ceased to exist.
criteria, not so much. It's more that they don't. In other words, like what we have with DNA is, we pass on genetic information to children.
Right.
The genetic information slightly mutates because there's differences in the copying and so forth, and that's one of the things that allows for evolution. These things do not have that. They don't have an encoded information that gets passed on from one generation to the next. But in those other four, I don't know every other, but in those four other definitions of life, they check all of those boxes for plasma, which is, I mean, to me, it's mind-blowing, because it's like, if it's really true, I mean, we don't know at this point, because these are just, isolated laboratory experiments, but
Benji,
like, yeah.
in layman's terms, in a more to break down what you're saying, basically, what are you saying about what that experiment came to, like, showed up? What did that show us?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I might have gotten a little too technical.
No,
there.
it's all good,
but yeah, for sure. So what the experiment basically found was that you can create these spheres of plasma. Plasma is basically an energized gas. So fire would be an example of plasma. The sun would be an example of plasma. And they could form these spheres of plasma that in some ways behave similarly to living cells.
Right.
Is basically what I'm
Here's my
getting at.
question. Well, one of my questions is that, like, say the universe itself is kind of like this conscious energy, okay? Like, another thing that I kind of thought, and it kind of was like something that Hawking was saying, is that I really think that physicality itself is inherent to reality. There was not like a big bang that originated anything. There's actually a continuum where there is some physicality that inherently just exists, and then and so it's not like there was like a chicken. You don't have to worry about the chicken and the egg argument or anything like that. It's more like on this continuum. And really, what you want to continue to see happen, like you're talking about ultimately, is like evolution of human beings' ability to interpret the cosmos, and to eventually navigate some of these more subtle aspects that I really think, in many cases, are right under our noses, so to speak. That we don't need to blast off to another place that far, in some ways, That actually some of this stuff's right here. Because there are some things that are pervasive to the entire universe, on a very microscopic level of it too.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the idea that perhaps, basically, there's micro universes just like there's macro universes, and it just kind of like the whole idea of like the universe is like, a single electron, and then electrons contain their own little micro universes, and so on and so forth, going infinitely
like
up and
Osmosis
down.
Jones.
Yeah, yeah, we're kind of like also the I don't know if you remember like the ending scene in Men in Black where like they have like the
which one?
they have like the first one where they have like the universes and the little spheres, and the aliens are
like
just
the
sort of
idea
like
that
picking
universes
them up like
are like
toys.
Russian, like on the Russian doll type thing.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, that's a brilliant analogy. Yeah, the idea that they're like Russian dolls, just
parallel, but
infinitely
within
small, infinitely. Yeah, exactly.
So what is that? What's the purpose of that? Does that mean that there's a bunch of us out there right now? Different versions of us? Like Rick and
I
Morty?
would say that. So there are other models of the multiverse idea that would be that would suggest alternate versions of ourselves. For that one, though, for the Russian doll model, I would interpret it differently because for example, if let's say it turned out there was like an entire universe inside of a proton or whatever, like there are many universes, the conditions in that would be so radically different from our universe that you probably would get something that wouldn't resemble you at all. And I would guess it would be the same thing for whatever is outside of this universe. So as far as that would be more the kind of the branching multiverse model of, basically there's a universe that forms for every kind of alternate possibility. If there's anything where there's one possibility or another, a different timeline forms for each one, and that would be more the model that you're talking about, where it would be like Rick and Morty. There'd be alternate versions of you, and at this point we don't really know if there are parallel universes. Like, this is actually something scientists call it the crisis in physics, because physicists are getting to a point now where the theories are becoming so abstract and mathematical that it's becoming harder and harder to keep up with it with actual tests and observations. And so it's like, well, they consider it a crisis because they're like, are we hitting the wall of what we can actually know through direct experiments and observations, and that's a big question right now. A lot of physicists and philosophers are arguing about.
Well, I just think a lot of these science, like, there's got to be a balance, because sometimes scientists say, I just think that there's an inductive side to this stuff. You don't have to you can just be like somebody who's very introspective and aware of their own perception and kind of like thinks about these ideas and lets them synthesize in your brain a little bit, and just kind of figure out like analogies and metaphors are really key here to even trying to understand this stuff, in a way. But like, it can get really mathematical, of course, where it's not even really representing an accurate view of physical reality anymore. It's just kind of like, abstract. But I don't really worry about that kind of stuff so much as I just sometimes wonder, like, say, like shadow people. Have you heard of that before?
Yes, I've heard of it.
I believe that there are these shadow people, and I think they live in a slightly different frequency of the universe than we do. And basically, it just makes me think that, like, that's the tip of the iceberg. If there's like these organisms that live in that kind of like plane, there's probably some kind of sentient life that exists in some form or another, like in every nook and cranny of the universe.
Yo, so check this out. So we got Benji, we got Pete. Pete, you come in from a perspective, you're saying like more philosophical. Benji, you're more coming from like evidence, scientific fact, right?
Yeah.
So
but I'm talking about like first-hand perception, like kind of like
something you perceive
too, like,
firsthand. You're saying?
Yeah, but like the idea of like a person using their perception, and like obviously that's like very inherently like fallacious even potentially, but like at the same time, if you can internalize your perception and understanding of the universe, you can start to use your own senses and your own mind to figure out what you're looking at.
So let's bring it back. We're talking about Skinwalker Ranch, and you're talking about natives and the native and the indigenous people, their interpretations of their interactions with these extraterrestrial or extra dimensional creatures, right? So Pete, so I might talk to you too. I might get two different interpretations. Pete, you might take more of the spiritual side. These are spiritual entities. I might talk to Benji, and you might say, oh, maybe these are actual, entities from here, from there. So I want to ask you that. So Pete's saying like, hey, I've seen like maybe shadow people, or I've talked to people who have seen some sort of, or had, I've personally talked to people who've had experiences of
Yeah,
like
I've only talked.
visions or
Bad visions
interactions.
myself.
Yeah, right. Interactions that seem to be completely real. So let me ask you that, Benji. So we're talking about Skinwalker Ranch. We're talking about these beings having these weird interactions with human beings in like mythology, and like we talked about the afterlife. What is your explanation for all that? Is it just the mind? What is it?
I mean, I think, it's always hard to, because again, we're talking about many phenomena here, and it's hard to say that there's one explanation for 20 different things. But I mean, one of the reasons why I'm more interested in looking at like more contemporary stuff is that with ancient accounts, it's very difficult to investigate it because, everyone like it's from a very long time ago, and so it's hard to know how much of it is just the lens of that time, how much of it is what actually happened. I mean, it's hard to know what happened in the remote past if you don't have a time machine, is kind of what I'm saying. But I mean, I think that it could be chalked up to a number of things, like again, it's hard for me to square on one explanation for all of it, but I mean, I'm I'm open to a lot of possibilities, obviously.
What's one? What's a
I'm sorry,
possibility?
it's a very vague
Throw a possibility
answer,
out there.
okay. I mean, so on the more, so there's kind of two ways that I would go about this. I would say there's the more kind of, I guess, grounded, kind of earthbound interpretation that it was mostly things in the mind. I mean, the human brain does have an incredible capacity for hallucinations, misinterpretations, and
Release
so
the
on.
DMT.
There's also, though, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like a lot of, for example, the shadow people thing you're talking about, a lot of those are due to like sleep paralysis. But I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, that
But
happens.
then, I mean, the other side of it is you could say maybe the more out there, I guess, interpretation is they were interacting with some kind of non-human intelligence from somewhere, be it another dimension or another planet, and they didn't have necessarily the language to describe it as a
Right.
technology, so they described it as a myth. That's the
Yeah.
whole, like the whole idea of like the cargo cults. I don't know if you know about those, but
Nah,
like,
what's that?
well, so there were these
You know
islands.
about that, Pete?
No.
So the cargo cults were there are these islands, kind of out in the Pacific, and they were very isolated, and the people that lived there had not really contacted the outside world for a very long time. And then suddenly, during World War II, soldiers started landing their planes there on the way to wherever they had to be. And they became stops for soldiers. And so, when the soldiers first arrived in their planes, you can imagine a society that's never seen an airplane before. Suddenly, there's just a giant airplane. Like it was very bizarre to them. And I mean, they were obviously intelligent enough to understand what it was after it was explained to them, and they did. But then it only took a few generations of sort of confabulation and interpretation and various games of telephone for this cult to emerge built around airplanes, where they would actually take like sticks and they would build runways, and they would build airplanes out of sticks, basically, little model airplane kind of things, and it became a cult. It became a quasi religion.
I got you. I see what you're saying.
And so the idea is that it's like
So the
what Arthur
interpretation
C.
was
Clarke.
they took something that was actual physical, just regular technology, and they took it as some sort of spiritual higher power, and they started worshiping it. And you're saying that
Yeah, well,
you comparing that to like how people could kind of see like certain things that are just outside of their realm of understanding at that moment. They can look at on some certain level that it's not necessarily that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there's a quote from a sci-fi writer I'm a big fan of, Arthur C. Clarke. He said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." So, you
Mm,
know, if you show your phone to a person in the Middle Ages, they're gonna think it's witchcraft.
yeah.
And
And then
so,
some. They'd be like, they would not be able to even like figure out
exactly,
what's going on.
exactly.
Or they
And we
play a
know
Jay
from the
Z
way
song
science.
to like somebody go to the medieval play like it's a hard knock life.
Yep.
They'd be like, "Yo, murder him!" You know what I mean? Like, burn him. Yeah, well, my fault. Go ahead.
No, no, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's exactly the idea. Is that um, so I'm sort of like to me the two possibilities are um, it's either a lot of what people interpret as quote unquote magic or paranormal phenomenon are just manifestations of things that are just in the brain, or there is something going on. There are physical phenomenon, but they represent an aspect of uh, phys- the, of the physics and of science that we haven't caught up with yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like think about it like this way: compass needles pointed north a long time before we understood that it was because of the Earth's electromagnetic field
Yeah.
pulling the needle north. So I think that there's a case to be made that just because we don't know the limits of our science now, um, that leaves room for a lot of these phenomena to be real things, but probably very different from how they're currently interpreted or how they were interpreted. Um, you know, because again, it's trying to describe something that's beyond your comprehension in terms that fit with the language of your level of society and technology, and
Yeah.
um, I would not be surprised if there are a lot of things out there that would we would still interpret as magic, but they're actually just some kind of science we don't understand.
Absolutely. Technology, if there was another planet and they have some sort of technology, say they're thousands of years advanced in front of us, are you kidding me? Like the way that they
Yep.
can just break down molecules or like use the elements to fuel their technology would completely bug us out. Our brains we might have a stroke just watching something occur like that. So I absolutely agree with you. Let me say this. Like it's refreshing and it's cool to like really have you here on Herm Radio, man. Because on Herm Radio, honestly,
Thank
like
you.
we have a lot of people, and then like when I met you, man, I respected that and appreciated that about you. We just got into a conversation about this exact stuff we're talking about now, and I was like, wow, man, this is a respectable dude, and it's like some of the things we're talking about, I might not necessarily agree with him like on a spiritual level about certain things. Maybe his take, like say maybe I believe in the afterlife, maybe he doesn't, that type of stuff. But for us to sit down and have a conversation of like really going over evidence and like really talking, like that's how we all come away from it like better people, because it's like you can
Exactly.
be too religious, you can be too not having no faith, you know what I mean, one of the whatever you want to call it. But I want to say this, man, like a lot of the people here, like we have a lot of like-minded people. A lot of people believe in the ancient alien theories and the theory, like a lot of people are privy to a lot of knowledge and information that's going around and circulating right now. So that's one thing that I talk to you about in person that I want to talk to you about and bring up now, kind of keep it moving. But as far as like the history of mankind and extraterrestrial involvement in that, we have a lot of theories. We got the Sumerian theory, we got Egyptian information, Aztec, indigenous information, all talking about creation, all talking about flying aspects, gods, creatures beyond the human capabilities as we know it, all this type of stuff, right? One thing we hear about a lot is the Anunnaki. Anunnaki was first heard about, I believe, in Sumerian texts. You know what I mean? Maybe one of the older civilizations out there, right? A lot of people are coming into information and reading up, and they're believing and taking up the the knowledge that maybe we were bred or kind of created in part help by these creatures, by these extraterrestrial creatures. That there's a planet called Planet no, what do you call it? Nibiru, Planet Nibiru.
Yeah.
That is somewhere like not far from our solar system. That it cycles through every once in a while. There's a whole story about why they came here, what they came here for. That it has to do with the creation of us, all this type of stuff. I want to talk about that. I want to hear your take on that. I also want to bring that to other civilizations as far as the doggone and stuff like that. And I want to talk about, what do you think is true? What do you think has weight, or what do you think on the Anunnaki, the Sumerian history?
Yeah, sure. I would consider myself, when it comes to the Anunnaki, I would say on that matter, I'm a skeptic. And I could go into some of the reasons why, but I mean, for one thing, there's only one person who translated the Sumerian texts and came to that interpretation, and that was Zechariah Sitchin. And he is the only person who has that reading or that translation of the texts, and no other Sumerian scholars ever came to that conclusion, and he was never willing to actually debate one.
Yeah.
And so that to me is, I like to use the term the confidence of an innocent, the confidence of innocence, right? Like, if he was really confident in his interpretation of this text, he would have been able to debate him.
Put your belly away. You got
Oh man, all right.
You got a whole nother type of show going on. Come on. Come on. Pete trying to try to like get our views up, man. Come on, man. All right, my
fault. Man. How bad?
Yo, Benji, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, that's one issue I have with it, is that is the fact that they're like, he was never willing to debate any other Sumerian scholars about his interpretation, and I think that's a little fishy. And then another thing about the Anunnaki theory is, I think that there are some holes in the science in terms of this Planet X, this Nibiru, because, here's the thing, there's a lot of theories about how the government is hiding the information that Nibiru's out there. That's not really something that you'd be able to hide, because a lot of like civilians with telescopes would know if there was another planet in our solar system, even if it's currently, far away in its orbital cycle. I mean, if it was on a 3,000-year orbit, there have been calculations that have shown, which is what I think what Zechariah Sitchin arrived at. There have been calculations that have shown that the gravitational influence that would have on the solar system would result in very big differences from what we actually observe. So that's another problem. And then you also have the issue that, like, at least I haven't seen, and again, like, by the way, I mean, disclaimer here, nothing I say should be taken as gospel. Yeah, and I hope to think it's an informed opinion, but it's really up to everyone to come to their own conclusions. I'm just presenting the evidence as I understand it. But I mean, my other issue with the Nibiru thing is that if it was on a 3,000-year orbit that periodically entered the inner solar system, in my opinion, there should be more ancient cultures that talk about a Nibiru. And I've only ever heard it being talked about in the Sumerian context. But as we know, every ancient culture was obsessed with the stars. Ancient astronomers were incredible in just the level of precision that they were constantly observing. So there should be more records from other cultures corroborating this whole interpretation of the Sumerian Anunnaki, Planet X, whatever. There should be more. There should be more other cultures that also saw Planet X.
So you don't think they
Now
are?
that being said,
Are they not?
I've not seen it.
Okay.
As far as I know. And that's one of the other reasons why I'm a skeptic on that issue.
So
But
you're saying that
I mean, as far as
Sumerians are the only civilizations, to the best of your knowledge, to speak on there being this planet?
and they might not have even, because that's just Zechariah Stitchin's interpretation of what the Sumerian tablet said. So on both levels, there's kind of, I think the evidence is a little suspect. But obviously, I don't rule out like the ancient astronaut theory in general. I mean, I think it's completely possible that there could have been encounters with, and you know, if you take the modern UFO phenomenon to be alien visitation, then you know it would make sense that they've been here for a long time, and their other cultures also interacted with them and built mythologies around it and stuff. So that's definitely still a possibility, no doubt. But in the specific instance of the Anunnaki, I don't think that holds up as a possible example of it.
Okay. Okay. So what about the Dogon? So the Dogon people, what is it, Western Africa, I believe.
Yep.
They had an uncanny ability to actually know the positioning of certain planets far away, outside the galaxy, I believe, and they had a whole mythology. They said they were visited by certain extraterrestrials and so on. So what about that? I know that's a different separate theory.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. That's something that I find a lot more, I guess, interesting and compelling than the whole Anunnaki story, because so there were a lot of things that the Dogon said about astronomy. Like, for example, they knew about Saturn's rings. They knew about the 4 major Galilean moons of Jupiter. They knew about they had something similar to white dwarfs, which is like one of the remnants of a dead star. Like after a star blows up, basically it leaves behind this little core of condensed matter. And they described the Sirius star as having a companion that was super dense.
Yeah.
And the way they the way I think they described
they're
it was
predicting
like,
the density of a planet light years away, right?
or a star,
Star.
or a remnant of a star.
Gotcha.
And what's really interesting is that they later found out that Sirius did have a companion that was a white dwarf. And they also knew about, again, the moons of Jupiter. They knew about Saturn's rings. They knew about a lot of things where you would have needed telescopes to have known about them, and there isn't any conclusive evidence that they had telescopes. So, you know, and they said that this was all told to them by the Dogon, or by the, not the Dogon, I forget what their name for the visitors was. But they claim that this was told to them by extraterrestrial visitors, and that's where they got the information. I think, I mean, the Dogon mystery is really interesting. I think that one of the questions that we have to ask is, to what degree is that their completely established like mythology, and to what degree is that something that came about when the anthropologists interviewed them in the 1930s? Because that's where all of it comes from, is that these anthropologists were studying, and the question is, was there any contamination of information? And that would be the thing. That's the question that we have to answer to really know 100% if what we're looking at is a case of alien visitation. And because, the thing is, right, like, for example, there are a lot of examples where what they were describing was way ahead of, like, I mean, it was ahead of its time, but at the same time it was of its time, because they were describing a lot of things that matched a 1930s understanding of astronomy. For example, they didn't describe any planets past Saturn. We now know there are planets past Saturn.
Yeah.
They didn't describe anything denser than white dwarfs. Now we know about neutron stars, which are denser than white dwarfs. And so it was consistent with the view of astronomy in the 1930s, but that's kind of the problem. There's nothing that's beyond that. But that doesn't rule it out, obviously. I mean, my opinion of the Dogon mystery is I'm waiting to see what I want to see that would, I think, swing the debate one way or the other, and that would conclusively determine.
So this is something that hasn't
if
happened
what we're
yet,
looking at,
that if it happens, is going to change your opinion on if these people were in contact with extraterrestrials?
Well, right now I don't have an opinion.
Okay.
I would say, to me, the door's open. But to me, the thing that I would want to see as the conclusive evidence would be something from before 1930, something like an artifact, a piece of pottery, something like that, that was an ancient record showing that they had this knowledge before they met the anthropologists, or that they had these ideas before they met the anthropologists. And that, I think, is the thing that we need, that would really conclusively, because if we found that, then, holy shit, like, these people knew about a lot of things way before they would have had the means to know them. Yeah. But as it stands now, we can't rule out the possibility that the anthropologists may have contaminated that information. And so that's the question. And I don't know the answer, I think it's, with these kinds of things, it's very important to say sometimes, like, I really don't know.
Yeah,
but I think the possibility is there. Yeah. I think the possibility is there. I don't rule it out, but like, my mind isn't made up one way or the other, really.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So let's keep it moving. And I want to know, so we talked about the past, we talked about historical references of possible visits, stuff like that. So this is something we're actually dealing with now in 2020 and of recent, of possible visits, sightings, and so on. So what do you think about some of these most recent sightings that were actually sanctioned by the government as being authentic? I believe the guy from Blink-182 was, like, helped bring them to light or something like that. So those are the ones.
Yeah, they're very interesting.
What's up with that?
By the way, is Pete good?
Yeah,
Pete good?
Yo, Pete, you good?
Yeah, I was listening.
All right, yo.
All right. Free to jump in at any moment. I can be a little bit of I'll put it to you this way: when I start going, I don't shut up. So if you want to get a word in, just go ahead.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, we gotta hear from you, Pete, man.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as those go, I think that's really interesting, compelling stuff, because what you have is not only testimony of pilots, but you have infrared footage on gun cameras and radar that are tracking these objects, and all three sort of points of evidence are indicating that these things are doing really just crazy aerial acrobatics. They're moving at ridiculous G-forces that should kill any pilot flying them.
Jet propulsion can't create that type of movement, right?
I mean, yeah, like, whatever these things are, it represents something very, it would have to be something very advanced, because, like, for something to do these sudden accelerations and sudden stops is just crazy, you know?
Yeah.
And again, it's like in these particular cases, we have more than just eyewitness testimony. We have electronic instruments that are capturing these things on radar and on gun camera videos.
And the
So
government has come out and said that.
I think it's
yes,
really
this is
interesting.
real. Yeah. The government came out and said this. Yes,
Yeah,
it's real.
yeah. Well, they've. Yeah, I mean, and I can only speculate as to why they chose to release all of this now.
Yeah.
But
very interesting.
that's all of that's very compelling. I mean, I think that is the most compelling case for current visitation by aliens, or at least, you know, if this is because, you know, people are saying, oh, it's just some secret human technology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's say it is.
Okay.
Who is doing this, right? Like, who is out there with this insane technology that can fly loops around the fastest fighter jet, and like, why hasn't whatever government that's using this taken over the world with it yet? You know, like, you know, if my point is this: I've not heard at this point of any war being fought with flying saucers. No country's been invaded yet by another human government in UFOs. It hasn't happened. And so
your theory is,
I'm wondering
if this was human, then they would have used this stuff by now, you're saying.
Exactly. That's my biggest issue with the interpretation that it's secret human technology, because that's the main thing that, you know, like it used to be, you know, the skeptical interpretation was, oh, this is just misinterpretations by the pilots because it's just their testimony. But that's not the case anymore. I mean, we have the radar data, we have the videos. So now it's like, okay, now the more skeptic explanation is that these are secret technologies. But again, it's like, why hasn't this insanely advanced technology been used openly by any agency on Earth? Because whoever has this technology, if it is ours, if it is human, could very quickly dominate the planet. And no one's done it, you know.
All right,
an imperial power like Russia or America, they would have done it by now.
So devil's advocate, what if it was a plan that intricate and that like detailed, where they really were like spoon feeding technology and like in complete control, that it's not a military, because that's basically what the theory is, that many are kind of coming out and saying like, okay, this is technology that we have access to, we have knowledge of this, we have complete control and access over this, and it's being used, or it will be used, to kind of control and influence the masses in some sort of way. So like, is that possible?
I'm not sure I really understand what you're saying.
So like for instance, you're saying like there's no way, if they have this technology, if they have this military technology, why wouldn't they just boom, take over the world? What if they've been in control this entire time? They have this technology, is way deeper than that. You know what I mean?
Sure. But I mean, then I would ask, you know, like, where are all of the engineers in the secret government that are building and flying these things to man this giant international operation? Like, there's so many players involved in that, and you know, that's the interesting thing, is that, you know, the skeptic line, right, is Occam's razor. You go with the simplest explanation. But now with the whole theory that this is just human technology, you actually end up with more complicated explanations. You know, like, it gets more convoluted. than if you just say that maybe it is coming from somewhere else. And I think that's what makes all of this really compelling to me, you know? And again, I don't claim to have the answers. Like, I don't rule out anything at this point as to what these things are because, you know, the U in UFO stands for unidentified, obviously. But my hunch is that, like, so far I haven't been convinced by any argument that this is human technology or a natural phenomenon. I haven't seen anything that can account for these things' behavior in those terms.
Yo, Pete, you still there?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm just, I mean, like this part of the talk, I'm just kind of listening because it's more scientific, you know. I don't know, you
We're
know.
speaking on. So I
It's
wanna. I wanna know theory though. Like so, I talked to kind of about potential theory. Like so, we're talking about these recent sightings of UFOs, man. What do you think? Do you think it could be part? Do you think it could be native? That this is technology that we have? Do you think it's something that's visiting us? Do you think it's something that's foreign but it's been here?
I think that there is many, like probably many, like sentient being groups that can cloak themselves in our universe, like in our like little wavelength, and can basically come in and out of this like denser part of the universe whenever they want, because they're able to harness some of the energy in the universe to basically levitate or like float over the, like just travel huge distances, like seemingly like in like unnatural to human being ways, you know. I don't know. I just think that they must be everywhere, not like in outer space per se, but rather like within the like the layers that already exist, like we were talking about before, you know.
Yeah, the interdimensional hypothesis, which I think
Yes.
is completely possible. You know, like um, again, I would say I'm open to any theory things are because again, at this point, it is an unknown phenomenon, and all we have are hypotheses. But yeah, I mean, it, you know, um, I yeah, I think it's definitely possible. Could be interdimensional, you know.
So what do you think, Benji?
Yeah,
What do you?
and just
My
of a
fault. Go ahead.
finer gradient of a thing that we're not used to perceiving.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you know, like we talked about earlier, the human senses are very limited. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's not even, you know, that's not theoretical at all. That's fact. I mean, we can only perceive a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Like,
Right.
I will never be able to tell you. You know, we're on radio right now. I would never be able to tell you what radio looks like as a color, but radio is a color because radio is another wavelength of light, just like
Mm.
all of the other colors are. It's just a color that our eyes can't see. Same thing with X-rays. X-rays are a color; they're just a color that our eyes can't see. So,
Yeah.
um, you know, and literally, I would not be able to. Um, I would never be able to actually tell you what radio looks like because the human eye is just not wired for that, you know? And who knows? I mean, you know, if there was beings that evolved on a planet around a star that emitted, say, more infrared light or more ultraviolet light, they might be able to see those wavelengths. In fact, very probable something out there like that out there exists because there are animals on Earth that can see wavelengths that we can't see. The mantis
Right.
shrimp. There's an incredible creature. You should look it up afterwards. It's called the mantis shrimp, and it can snap its claws and create a little bubble that will then collapse, and it does a thing called a sonoluminescent reaction. And it's, I mean, I'm not sure exactly the physics of it, but it creates these flashes of light, and the mantis shrimp can see, I'm pretty sure it could see in ultraviolet. So it can see things that are invisible to us, you know?
Right.
And if there are other animals on Earth that can see wavelengths that we can't see, I'm sure all kinds of alien species are out there that are seeing in different wavelengths and different things. And that's one of the big issues with communication with extraterrestrials, is like, if you're going to try to design a message, you know, there's all these groups that are trying to design messages and beam them out into space. What do you put on that message? What's actually a universal language that any sentient organism would be able to understand? Is there such a thing? You know, that's a really important question.
Yeah. I think it would have to be some almost like sonar or like partially based like musical stuff, you know, using the vibrations of the universe and stuff, you know, the strings or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like the one thing that I always hear, or that always comes up in these conversations, is would be the universal language, because, you know, like no matter what your culture is, 2 + 2 = 4. But I mean, I question that too, because, you know, how many fingers am I holding up? 10. I'm holding up 10 fingers. All of our math that we use is in base 10. Why is that? Because we have 10 fingers. If we had, you know, 20 fingers, we would probably have base 20 math. So, like, even mathematics is something that really is determined by the experience of the people coming up with it, you know? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if there is a universal language, and that's it's a really humbling thought that maybe there could be forms of intelligence so utterly different from ours that we would not even be able to say hello, because the language barrier is just too deep. And I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but it's just a really interesting question, you know?
Yeah.
Can we actually establish meaningful communication with extraterrestrials? Are there concepts in language that are universal enough to do that? And actually, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, when it first started, their big interest was dolphins, because dolphins have a complete language. They have syntax. They have, you know, very elaborate structure to their communication. And so in the early days of SETI, they thought, if we can figure out how to speak dolphin, we can crack a language that has nothing in common with any human culture, and that means perhaps we could crack an alien language. And I'm pretty sure there are still people in SETI, in the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that are still working on that to this day.
Yeah.
Well, man, like you
That's
could
interesting.
just here on Earth alone, you think about we talk about living organisms that we can't understand. What about plants and animals? You know what I mean? You got plants that have intelligence. You got fungus. We was talking about we was talking to this dude a few episodes ago about fungus and the intelligence of fungus and the communication network. And like these are like things that exist that, like you said, they have such a different understanding of existence, or they they're on a different level of existence to the point where we have no idea of how to communicate or say hello to a mushroom or a plant. You know what I'm saying? So it's
Yeah.
like just that alone. It's like we talk about on other planets, like what's out there. There's so much here alone. Like you talk about the shrimp, the mantis shrimp, and how they're able to see like this whole other aspect of life, and it's like that's in our oceans. You know what I mean? What's
Yep.
like shrimp and some of these deep sea creatures are so foreign and so crazy like to the mind already. It's like you don't even have to go to other planets to really see what looks like it's extraterrestrial. So that's interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the ocean's got some freaky things, you know. Actually, here in California, just a couple of weeks ago, there were a bunch of bioluminescent plankton washing up on the beaches, and I went out to go look at it, and man, it felt like I was on an alien planet, because, you know, I'd just run in the sand, and there'd just be glowing spots where my feet were. It was crazy.
That's dope, man. Did you get any of that on video, or were you just experiencing it?
I mean, I don't have very good like I just went with a phone
Yeah,
camera, so it wasn't like
that must
you
have
know
been
phone
amazing.
cameras are yeah like I didn't really get any pictures, but there are a lot of pictures you can look up online of it.
So they were like,
It was incredible.
they're like just all
Yeah,
different colors.
bright blue.
Oh wow.
The it looked like it looked like neon blue. Like if you took a blue glow stick and snapped it in half and just basically just unloaded a bunch of blue glow stick juice into the ocean. That's what it looked like. It was crazy.
That's nuts, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's there's a lot just here on this earth. There's a lot. It's not even like so that's interesting. So all right, I want to segue and keep the conversation moving to like probably one of the points we'll probably start to end on. But like I want to ask you this, Benji and Pete. You know what I'm saying? Like, but coming from your perspective, everything we talked about, we're talking about the past. We talked about like things here and there, events and just stuff that. But like and that's great, but like where is this all headed? What do you see for our future? What do you see for the future of humankind? What should we be looking to? What should we be working on? What do you see the future to be?
Um, I, since I've been talking a lot, I think I'll let Pete pick it up first.
Well, I just think that, like, personally, I'd like to see more of a focus on kind of like augmenting ways that human beings can naturally perceive the universe in ways that are non-invasive. So, like, not so much emphasis on like artificial intelligence and these like microchips as enhancing human beings' ability to perceive nature through, well, partially through like firsthand subjective experiences with people that are very already informed with the science and all the background necessary to know what they're looking for and what they're looking at. Um, but I just think that like there's all this emphasis now on like technology and artistic, I mean, and artistic artificial intelligence. And I think that there's a side of the human being where you evolve and grow that's very important is to still be focusing on and not to think that technology is going to be able to do all the things that we can do, you know? Kind of. Technology, I feel like, should be more of a tool
Okay,
rather than like a solution to the world's problems.
definitely. Because if not, then it takes over, and we fall victim to technology, right?
Yeah, we become less able to just think originally and abstractly and to make meaningful connections.
So you're kind of saying, from my perspective, at hand, the future at hand is man versus machine, and that we need to heed the warning of not to let the machine overtake man, but to work with the machine, kind of.
I think we need to just shift the focus a little bit from that sort of thing to greater understanding of psychology, to more understanding of spirituality and nature and energy
Do you see
and
that
things
happening?
like what
Do you see that happening?
I see the focus more being on artificial intelligence right now and the singularity and stuff like
And you
that.
think that's a problem?
Well, I think it's an imbalanced focus.
What's the problem with that? Why is that a bad thing?
Well, I think that um, it's kind of like not as enlightening. It is relying on. It's kind of like GPS or something like that. You want to use GPS as a tool, but you don't want to actually be so reliant on it that you can't find anywhere to go without it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You want to be able to use the technology as a tool or an extension of yourself. Um, and I also don't think that like it's going to take over the world. Like there's going to be like evil robots or something like that. I just think that it's like taking the values and shifting them quite a bit of people, you know?
Yeah, that's a big fear, and a lot of people would agree with you. Definitely, like that's definitely on point. Everything you said. So yeah, I asked. You could. It's up to you, Benji. You can answer that question. You could.
Yeah.
You could. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll answer. Yeah, sure. I would say I agree with the point that technology should be a tool, and really, in my opinion, the thing about technology is a means. And whatever means you create is based on whatever ends you're trying to achieve. So we need to create technology that is in the service to the benefit of humankind, to the benefit of our planet, to the benefit of creating a better world. Um, Rather than, I mean, I think the whatever technology you're going to create is going to be dependent on what you're going to use it for. And at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's like if technology is a tool, you can think of it like a hammer. You could use a hammer to build a house to house a bunch of homeless people, or you could use a hammer to bludgeon one of them over the head and kill them. Um, it really comes down to your motivations, and that's why I think that in addition to developing our technology, we need to develop our society along with it,
Yeah.
and we need to advance psychologically at the same time that we advance technologically.
Right.
Like I agree that right now there's a gap between those two things. I don't think AI is necessarily a bad thing at all, but
I don't think it's bad at all, but I
yeah,
think it's the focus on it. But yeah.
yeah. I mean, I do agree that like technology, like I don't think technology is good or bad. Technology is good or bad depending on the motivations of the people making it.
Mm,
And
Right.
right now, too much of it is in the service of warfare, and we like we should be focusing on things like fixing the environment, um, improving people's health, exploring space, exploring the ocean, um, looking into are there other dimensions, like what exists on a really small scale. We should be dedicating ourselves to exploratory science and technology that helps people. We should absolutely be spending no resources on warfare, because not only is it a waste, it's a destructive waste.
yeah.
You know, and I think like I want to see a world where people's knowledge and people's wisdom is on the same level, because knowledge in the service of the unwise is a dangerous thing.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Yo, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. Sitting down,
Likewise.
talking with both you gentlemen. We definitely gotta have something like this again. Continue this
Yeah.
Yeah.
conversation. Definitely, because I think people could really benefit just from listening to this. Enough people heard it, I'm sure, live, but a lot more people hopefully will hear it in the future. It's gonna be on YouTube tomorrow, and all that type of stuff. So definitely a lot of great information. It arises like questions. I really like what both you guys said about the future, man. It gives me like hope and kind of focus. Definitely some great advice. Benji, man, is there any like anything you want to promote or anything you'd like to like let people know?
I mean, if you're interested in um, my work and so on, I do have an Instagram page where I semi-regularly post whatever I think is the most interesting news and things like that. So um, you can follow me there. It's at Commander Spaceboy. That's my Instagram handle. And um, you know, if you have any questions about anything like this, and you can just shoot me a direct message on my Instagram, and I'll be happy to answer it. I love sharing this stuff. I love sharing this information. So, um, whatever you're curious about, hit me up.
Absolutely. So hit him up, Commander Spaceboy at on IG. Pete, we gonna be seeing a lot of you, man. Anything you want to say,
Yeah.
Pete, before we get out of here?
Well, I just think Yeah, just look at this stuff on all levels, externally, internally, all the different possible ways of looking at this kind of stuff because it's fascinating and it's becoming more and more relevant to day-to-day life. So,
Conversation is very important. Polarity, different perspectives. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Wisdom, sharing wisdom with each other, having the wherewithal to expand your mind to things that you don't understand, don't necessarily even believe in. Being able to sit down and listen to them, it makes us all better people. That's the way it should be, man. Because
Absolutely.
people will go like, will sit here and they'll be like, no, I feel like this. No, I feel like that, and wars get started like that. You know what I mean? Because people don't know how to just get beyond that. It's like, oh no, I believe in afterlife. Oh no, I don't believe in afterlife. You're evil. I'm good. You know what I mean? It's like, nah, man, that's not real life. We're all here to exist. We're all here to have different perspectives, information, and if we communicate, then we can really come to like greater understandings. You know what I'm saying? So I really appreciate your expertise, Benji, and your time. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, Pete. Sitting down with you guys, man. We got to do more of this. Have more panels, more discussions, everything from philosophy to astronomy, everything in between, man. But yeah, man, both you guys, I would love for y'all to come back on soon, man.
Yeah, same here. It's been an absolute
great.
pleasure.
No doubt, no doubt. Be safe. I'll talk to you guys soon, man.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right,
Watch the skies.
one love. Watch the skies. All right.
Uh,
Yeah, man, another really dope episode. We took a different turn. We're gonna be trying to do more of this stuff, like different informative aspects of life, science. You know what I mean, religion, whatever, man. We definitely gonna have a lot of dope stuff coming up for you guys. So that was Herm Radio, and we out.